reparation of the harms. Um, and I think actually we shall be exploring in some shape tonight some of those issues and themes because there are special reasons for us to remember Muslim histories, particularly that of medieval Iberia, modern Spain and Portugal, because the processes of settler colonialism that informed the European empires in the Atlantic world were incubated in some ways, tried out in Iberia and the Mediterranean against Muslims and Jews. So there are connections between these histories that we want to explore, as well as talking about other aspects of Muslim Spain. So I'd like to turn to tonight's event, which is a bit different. It's a little experimental for MSGP, and to me, very exciting, this opportunity. It's not a typical lecture, but an exploratory collaboration. We've called it a dialogue. I've been talking with our guest, who I'll be introducing in a moment, we should think of it as a rap session and a collective riff with all of you about Al-Andalus and Muslim Spain and why and how we don't see its stories for what it can tell us today. So I have to thank Sister Mona Rahman for introducing me to student Asim, a multidisciplinary artist who works in many different media, who's a creative producer and an author in the GTA region. And in discussing his work together, we realized that his artistic projects and my historical interests, whether on medieval Spain or contemporary conditions, were similarly confronting and challenging the stereotypes and narratives that underpin Islamophobia, and in particular, his storybook, Tyer of Ties, set in Al-Andalus, suggested an opportunity to do something creative together. So, student Asim, thanks for joining us and being a part of this and directing the creative, idea here to really explore, Muslim Spain in this new fashion. And I'm, wondering, what brought you to, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your work and how you got interested in Muslim Spain and wrote the Tyer of Ties.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, Brother Adnan, for your generous this generous opportunity and to work with you and your team, and to the wonderful Sister Mona Rahman for being just an amazing person and an ally in the work that I'm trying to do. It's a great question. How did I start off? Why did I write the Tyer of Ties, or how did that happen? If I can share my screen as well while I'm speaking, I can share share the cover. Here it is. Can you guys, can everyone see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a good question. Why did I write the Tyer of Ties? And the way I'd like to look at this is really there's two major ideas and one catalyst. And I had a dream about this bridge, and it was something that was extremely peculiar and something I don't really remember my dreams. So typically, this was something very, very out of the way. And I want to get to that in a second, but I really want to talk about two major forces that I think created the opportunity for me to even do this project. And the way I look at it as an artist is really there's a conscious force, set of forces that are happening in a subconscious set of forces. And I think for me, the conscious set of forces is, even being remotely aware that there's, a history here of me, and but not even knowing about it. And growing up, you would hear about uh, the Muslims sometimes would say, that the Muslims were in Spain for 800 years, but that's where the conversation would begin and end. Like they themselves did not know much more than that, and really, if you will, they footnoted themselves into history. So I call it the footnote syndrome. It's
Right.
like everyone like knew like one thing. It's like, okay, but that gave me immense power. It felt like something, and that's connected to the subconscious set of forces. But I think it's incredible knowing that, knowing now that, growing up, this was never taught to me. I didn't know about this. I didn't even know about the partition, which is British history, but we don't talk about it, but it's British history. And how over 4 million soldiers, Indian soldiers, went to war for England for people who didn't really care about them to begin with. So it's like, but we don't know that ourselves. We don't know that. We don't even know about our own contributions, and we're footnoting ourselves as well into history. So for me, it's just that kind of background, and I think it's incredible that you can grow up not even knowing you're invisible, because I never felt I was invisible. That's the amazing thing about it, because when you grow up in a system where you don't even see yourself, then you get used to not seeing yourself. So I'm not one of those people that say that I never saw myself. I actually didn't see myself or even think about that to even begin to see myself, because there's nothing around me that told me that I could see myself.
Right.
So
You mean like in the wider culture, there aren't any ways in which, Muslim history as part of Europe or its contributions in many fields of art and music and philosophy and science are just not really known or mentioned or developed as part of our collective human culture.
right, and also that, but just seeing like sports stars, seeing yourself in books, seeing yourself in you know uh, other types of media, in films, you don't see that. But what you do see is that everything is kind of what you're not supposed to see, or what you don't want to see, or what you feel is not who you are. But really, I think that's what really kind of was the background that set this up. And many, many years ago, I did take a theory course on Al-Andalus, but there was no visuals or anything like that. It was a lot of history to cover in 800 years. And I thought, well, why not? But I never did anything with it, because it's not tangible, right? I mean, it's just like, what do you do with that information? And incidentally, I'll just give you an example from childhood. Was when I was growing up, I saw the Ten Commandments, and so Prophet Musa, or Prophet Moses, became my favorite prophet. And I would tell people that's my favorite prophet, because even though I was learning about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was not visible and he was not something tangible, but Moses was, right? So I think that when
Well,
you
who wouldn't be compelled by Charlton Heston, I mean, so there you
right,
go.
no, but as a
As the
child,
voice.
right, it just kind of invoked that imagination. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of, so years later now, we're I had a dream, and um and so coming from that background again, of not really seeing yourself in many things, um I just had this dream, and I had this dream, and I of uh of a object, a flying object that started to fall piece by piece until an entire bridge was formed. And I have some visuals here of what I'm talking about. Here, if I can just go to it quickly, and we can show you some of the images after. But it felt like this, that there was like this river, and there was this huge flying pieces, and it formed this structure. And what was distinct about it was that it was white, and it was made out of stone. It was medieval stone, and it was not something modern. I knew immediately when I woke up that, first of all, I remembered the dream. And that was strange in and of itself. I don't really remember many dreams, but the dreams I have remembered, I believe, meant something, and they had significance. But as quick as it came, it vanished. But I just knew that I had this feeling that this bridge was in Al-Andalus. I've never actually seen images of Al-Andalus. I haven't dreamed of going to Europe. I don't think about I rather go to Pakistan and spend my time. I don't usually have those kinds of thoughts, and I never thought, even after taking that theory course many years ago, or hearing the people talk about that footnote, where we're footnoting ourselves and saying, oh, the Muslims were in Spain for 800 years, that I would ever think to still go to Spain. It wasn't compelling enough. But when I saw this, I it was just interesting. But as quick as it came, it left me. A few weeks later, I was in a conversation with some friends. We tried to get together, but we couldn't. It didn't work out. And as soon as I put the phone down, this story came to me. And as I wrote the story, the bridge that I saw a few weeks earlier wrote itself into the script. And I was like, okay. And the next thing I knew, I was on a plane and I'm in Spain.
Right. So you actually went to Spain.
I went to Spain.
What stood out for you in your trip to Spain? Um,
Yeah,
why did
absolutely.
you think the Muslims, like, so you went to Spain. Why did you think Muslims preceded you to Spain? And what did what were, the things that really stood out to you?
Well, I have some very special pictures that I took of Spain, from the minute I arrived. And, here we have, we just landed and now we're going to Cordoba. And as we go to Cordoba, like you see this kind of mountainous region, but then you see like this amazing like vegetation, and you see like rows of this vegetation and like stuff like this. And I was like, wow, I mean, this is amazing. And that kind of connected with that these ideas that Spain was the jewel of the world. And via the Muslims, Spain was enriched with with lemons and fruits and silks and materials and technologies and so on. So that was the impression I had when as soon as I came here, and it was really um, a, a good beginning. Here's something interesting I took. This looks like someone that's sleeping. It could be Al-Andalus that's sleeping and is maybe saying, hey, it's your turn to wake me up.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about what you mentioned about how it was sort of this jewel. It was really admired, and medieval travelers from Northern Europe, for example, would regale audiences upon their return because they went often on pilgrimage to Santiago, St. James of Compostela, Santiago de Compostela, a major shrine up in Galicia in the north. But they would have contact with, Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus, which was ruled by Muslims since around 711, really mid 8th century is when kind of most of the Iberian Peninsula was governed by Muslims from North Africa. And one medieval abbess wrote and described Al-Andalus as the ornament of the world. And that has, that phrase, that characterization has become the title of a popular book by Maria Rosa Menocal about the unique features of the culture of medieval Spain created by Muslims, Christians, and Jews. So it was captivating, even at its time, as this remarkably cosmopolitan, lush, gorgeous architecture, and as you were pointing out, all these many fruits and vegetables from the Mediterranean, and also that had been brought from further east, uh, Persian limes and other things that were brought during the what's called actually in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries the Islamic Green Revolution. There was a real agricultural revolution that took place in the Muslim Middle East, and they brought a lot of these plants and crops to Al-Andalus and made it. It was fertile land, but introduced real new riches. But actually, some of the parts of Spain weren't actually all that productive agriculturally, and so it was really some of the techniques of farming, particularly irrigation, and building channels for water that had to be managed very carefully and engineered in order to distribute scarce. The pictures you showed
Mhm.
show also that it is a pretty arid,
Yeah,
environment, like other parts of, say, the Middle East are also arid, and so they had developed, a lot of techniques for, distributing water effectively. In irrigation works and things like that to make bloom, these arid zones.
Right. Yeah. I mean, definitely we can talk about that when the Muslims were expelled from Granada and they moved into the Al-Bukhara Mountains. But there's a couple of things I just wanted to come back to. The reasons why I wrote the book. And for me, when I wrote this book and then when I came on this trip, it was highly emotional. It was highly, highly emotional to be in a place that you were and now you no longer are. And so for me, as as someone who's trying to contribute ideas, I've like I said, no one has around me or myself know about Al-Andalus. I mean, no one really does. I mean, it's just kind of more academic. But the work I'm trying to do is to cross that line and to come into a more social context, which is why I produced this book and even situating Al-Andalus here right from the start. When you open the book up, you know, you right from the start, there's a map, and you can recognize that Italy is right over here. So, and this is really the Strait of Gibraltar where the Muslims had come in from to Spain. Incidentally, I was reading about this and how there was actually communication before that as well. It's not like the Muslims invaded Spain, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the truth is that like just seeing this, it's very basic. Like just to see this says a lot, right? So it's like, oh, and it's like, how do you convey that to a public that doesn't even know, including the wider Muslim community? So I truly believe that now that that I know something about Spain and how Spain was Al-Andalus at one point, it's a moral crime for me to not be able to share this, and that's very serious. So I try to take that very, very seriously because you know it's completely an invisible history. And when we're footnoting and talking about Spain in one sentence ourselves, but you would think the Western people do that. That's what they were used to anyway, how we get footnoted. But when we're doing it ourselves, we know that there's an emergency here, and we need to talk about this, and we need to talk about it in a way that can cross that line.
Well, that's an important point. I mean, maybe it's time for our poll. Actually, we wanted to ask actually people if they thought, the history of Al-Andalus matters, and also why they came here tonight. So, everybody who's participating, you can. The poll should have popped up on your screen. Please do participate, and then maybe we can talk with you after looking at the results. About your impressions, why you're here today, and then we have a second poll that we'd like to do right after this about whether and why the history of Al-Andalus matters. In what way might it matter? So we'll just take a minute or so. I think they give us about a minute or a minute and a half for these polls, and then we'll take a look at those results. Almost everybody has done it. Maybe while we're still finishing up the poll, let's take a look at another image on the screen. Awesome, you have a few.
Yeah, I wanted to actually talk about something that was actually bugging me.
Mm.
Um, so as I was saying, you know, shall we give it a minute more, or shall we
Well,
just
I
jump?
think they've finished this poll. Why don't we launch the second and just take care of those two while we're on it.
Sure.
Or maybe we have to share the results here first. I don't know. I
Mm.
don't use polls too often in my classes, so I'm not always up on it. I like to ask people direct questions rather than just polling. Um, but we've got another question that we wanted, which was just like, why, does the story of Al-Andalus matter? I mean, I think the real question is, in what ways might it matter? But let's first see, I mean, is this just something that happened a long time ago? Is a curiosity? I mean, Asim, you've been mentioning, that we footnoted it. It's sort of reduced 800. Well, a lot of people talk about it as 800. I would say it's 900 years because really we need to be talking about from 711 to
Mm.
1609, right? Perhaps we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about why we should extend it to 1609 and not just
Mm.
end the period of Muslim history in Spain with 1492, which was, of course, as people may know, is the year in
Mm.
which the Emirate of Granada fell to the Spanish monarchies of Castile and Aragon under Ferdinand, Catherine, and Ferdinand. Why should we talk about Muslims in Spain? In fact, actually, the period after 1492, in some ways, is as important or more important for Muslim presence or lack of presence in Europe, and also as an analogy to our own condition as Muslims living as a religious minority in a multi-religious society. That was the condition of Muslims after 1492, but then they
Mm.
were forcibly converted. And we can talk a little bit about that whole process and became known as the Moriscos.
Right.
But in 1609, these newly converted Muslims and their subsequent descendants were actually finally expelled from Spain, starting in
Mm.
1609 to 1614. So actually, it's 900 years, really, that we could be talking about it. And, it seems like it's so remote from our present. But as I just pointed out, there are actually analogies to the contemporary situation that maybe might make it relevant in some ways. But reducing 900 years of history to just as kind of statement that you started out with that, well, Muslims were in Spain, I mean, so, but what did they do? What did they build? What did they create? How did that contribute? These are the kinds of questions.
And
Maybe
that's
we,
really,
yeah, go ahead.
absolutely. I think that is the the symbolism of this project is all of that, because I think that you hear this conversation about telling your story, right? You hear people just incidentally before, while I was preparing for this conversation, I saw a video about how the Muslims were in many places, as you see here. These are Arabic city names for Spanish cities, and some of them are directly from Arabic, like Jabal Tariq is Gibraltar, right? Some of them are Latin and they were made Arabic, but then others are not. Others like Yabisa, that's also an Arabic name here. But yeah, the idea is that there's a fascinating, rich contribution. Spain could not be what it is today if it wasn't for the Islamic presence. In fact, I was reading about the Spanish language. 30%, up to 30% linguists say of the Spanish language is from Arabic. That's
Hmm.
a massive amount for a footnote, right? Um, and I want to show you something else that's related to footnoting and being invisible is this. If you just Google straight up, you know, why the Muslims, I wouldn't even say that that was Google that did that to me. Look at that. Even Google's trying to be funny with us. It's why did the Muslims go to Spain? Well, you still get the same thing. This is what I'm talking about, where they say that, well, the invasion of Spain. So right away, they say it's like they started off with what we always know about the Muslim people, right? It's just always the invasion. But okay, fine. A result was the result both of Muslim readiness to invade and 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 of course the second part is of a call for assistance by one of the Visigoth factions. So it's like, which one is it? Is it both? Is it, I mean, why do they kind of put this one in the end? I mean, and the danger is when you read this as someone who's already seen images of the Islamic community, it's already, bad, bad, bad. I mean, that's all you see. And that was what my second point was, which I wanted to come to, was of why I wrote the book, was because of this.
Mhm.
Because, there's something very dangerous happening here with the narratives. The narratives are always, you know, it's like it's against you. But then when you say that, and you kind of appear to be a victim, people then say, "Oh, here you go again. Oh, here you go again." It's not like that. It's not really like that, because when you grow up with racism, when you grow up when your father's being called names, when you grow up with the TV always, bashing on you when you turn on any channel, you grow up in an environment where you don't feel like you belong. So there's a qualification to saying "here we go again," and rather it's "here we are again," right? When you got to explain Ramadan every year, you feel foreign. You feel like it's like it's the same thing. So when you're asked questions growing up that are strange to you, that you never would ask anyone else. So these kinds of things create that feeling. And now, when other people are in that atmosphere as well, and you come to this little paragraph, that's all you need to see. But now, if you do a little bit more digging, I found another quote here. Someone from Harvard University said, "Everybody that studies history at any university is aware that there was not an Arab invasion in 7/11." Right? So what, like, it's like, and rather, I found something so incredible. So the Muslims arrived in 7/11 in Spain, and they fought the Visigoth Empire. But then I discovered this. This was in 713, which is 2 years
Mhm.
later.
Mhm.
And there's a treaty that's signed between the Visigoth community and the Islamic community. And it says here that, this is a treaty establishing a treaty of peace and the promise and protection of God and his prophet. We will not set special conditions for him or for any among his men, nor harass them, nor remove them from power. His followers will not be killed or taken prisoner, nor will they be separated from their women and children, nor coerced in matters of religion, nor their churches will be burned, nor their sacred objects will be taken from the realm. That's incredible. But that is a lot of new information for a footnote that we say as well, and for others who come up with ideas like this that say that the Muslim readiness to invade, it's incredible, right? Because there's no context to that. And again, the premise is already something that's of violence and not the opposite. And I think that's why I think it's a moral crime. When you learn about these things, it's like, how do you know, try to do something about this? And I think for me, it's very, very basic right now. Coming back to that video I saw where the person mentioned all these things as well, but then they said, we need to write the history books. But there's a problem with that. If you haven't created the awareness, you can't write the history books. So I think we're not there. You don't just write the history books. You're talking to a community that needs to be aware, whoever it is, and then it can happen that way. So I think, and that's really a large reason why I wrote this, produced this, was for all these different reasons, is to just to belong. I think, and to challenge or contribute to the narrative that's out there. So yeah, is that useful? That's kind of some of the background as to, it's loaded for me. It's not. It's a lot of the art is an invitation to the public to learn about this time, and not think of it as a footnote, and maybe to challenge some of your premises as to what you see. And when it's in Britannica, that's I think it's a respectable thing.
Well, I mean, it's what people will find. I mean, I think that's
Yeah,
a really good point that if you look casually, what kind of information are you going to find about the history of Muslim Spain, of Al-Andalus? If anybody's even looking, we had in the poll, 11% of people said never heard of Al-Andalus and want to know what it is, right? In our first poll. If you go to try and find out what it is, you might come across one of these reference works like that, or Wikipedia or Britannica, these encyclopedias, and already embedded in the narrative is a decontextualized kind of way of presenting this history that affirms a lot of the stereotypes that people would have contemporaneously about Muslims. That Muslims don't belong in Spain. They must have invaded if they were there, right? In order to explain that question, why were they in Spain? If you dig a little bit deeper, even the Britannica, reference work mentioned, that they were invited, but that's sort of subordinate to this already ready to invade. It's a little bit like,
Right.
maybe Saddam Hussein didn't actually organize 9/11, but he would if he could. If he had a kind of
I mean,
nuclear bomb, he would use it, kind of thing. This kind of anticipation that the Muslim is a violent sort of force, that's
yeah,
part of the kind of contemporary narrative, and it's embedded also in the
yeah,
ideas about how Islam spread, Muslims spread by the sword, as it were. And of
right.
course, this is a much more complicated history. I mean,
Mhm.
Spain was riven by factional, parties competing for power within Visigothic Spain, and very often we think of this whole history of Spain as being Muslims came and invaded, and then subsequently by 1492, over the course of several centuries, the Christians managed to rid Spain of the Muslims and restore it to being what it was before, as if history works like that.
Mhm.
When in fact, actually, through much of this period, so I'm glad you're bringing out the periods here. There's a period basically in like the 10th and 11th centuries that is called the era of the party kings, the Muluka Tawaif. That is, every sort of city had its own local ruler, and in the kind of competitions for political power in medieval Spain, it ended up meaning that sometimes, you might have a Muslim emir trying to expand his territory against another Muslim ruler and enlist, Christian warriors and Christian nobles to fight on, his side to achieve that objective, and vice versa. That Catholic princes and nobles were always competing, with one another to expand their territories, and very often they might make alliances and collaborate and cooperate, with Muslims. And so the situation is so much more complicated and mixed in this kind of frontier zone. These were
Right.
mixed societies. All of these Muslim rulers, like we think that the Muslims came and that they displaced the Christians. No, they were rulers, and that meant that there weren't Christian rulers for those territories, but the entire society was composed of Christians and Jews and some few Muslims. And it took many, many years, hundreds of years, before even some of the most southern territories of the Iberian Peninsula were majority Muslim, in composition in terms of the religious affiliation. So it was a slow, organic kind of process, basically, of mixed societies, multi-religious societies, living and working together in various ways. And that isn't to say that it was some sort of romantic paradise where everybody got along all the time. Obviously, there was the Reconquista, there was, kind of holy war ideas, but those weren't the dominant way that we should frame the entire history, because these were always much more complex.
Right. And so yeah, I think once you start kind of peeling back the layers and really, how there's that danger of these singular narratives and of the popular narrative, right? It's again not that, this is not a conspiracy. Rather, it might be reality that what you're hearing is just one side of it, right? And it's incredible when you hear these kinds of narratives. And here's another one. Here's these Moors who were religious fanatics arrived in Spain in the year of 711. And that's how this is, again, this is the stuff that people read, and it already frames something in your mind, and a lot of it is references from before. So it's pancaked on top of each other, and you say, well, that's right. You don't even bother to refute that. So I think the idea of telling your story and the idea of creating, revealing what's invisible into what's visible is critical. It's necessary, and I believe that everyone is a change maker. And I think it's critical that through that process, people will formalize bodies of work. I think it's important to formalize bodies of work so that other communities can learn about that. And this again is a wonderful project that I've been a part of as well, that really shows the world in a way that I think has not been seen before. There's over 400 symbols and languages over here, and I was just focusing on, you mentioned the Moriscos, and the Moriscos were forced converts to Christianity, and I just want to show you they had. So this is research I've done on the uh, Islamic communities in different parts of the world. Here's something about Tatar. So Tatar, for example, has been written in like Arabic, Latin, Cyrillic, and Hebrew. Similarly, here when we come back to Spain, you had this secret language written that the Moriscos would use to communicate with each other before Arabic was outlawed. And this is classical Arabic, but morphed into adding letters and diacritics to produce Spanish sounds. So even though some of those classical Arabic rules do not apply here. However, this is just fascinating because it was something that the Muslims would use to write Spanish. So it's not actually writing Arabic; it's writing Spanish. And same with the Jewish community; they wrote Spanish in Hebrew, and that goes for Portuguese as well. Portuguese was written in Arabic, and it was written in Spanish. In Hebrew as well. There's so many languages here. Sometimes you just lose track of them. But they here we are. So this is Portuguese. Again, there's documents and histories written in Arabic that are Spanish. So I mean, if you just do a quick, you could just do a quick Google search of like, you know, just like that, and you see this Morisco alphabet, right, that comes up, and so it's fascinating history. So what I've done here is, again, you wouldn't care about Al-Hamiado, you wouldn't care about Tatar, you wouldn't care even about something from Canada like Inuktitut, because it's not really famous or the standard or something. But when you see it like this, those histories and those peoples and those cultures, those geographies, those technologies, those desires to belong and to contribute are revealed. So this has been very, very beautiful for me to see. Many people feel like they belong, feel like they actually are a part of something. And just one quick last point on this one. I remember when I first produced this, there was a girl on our street who spoke Tigrinya, and I showed her a black and white of this. This was 10 years ago. And when she saw Tigrinya, her eyes lit up, and I still remember that. Because she's never seen Tigrinya on anything formal apart from maybe a restaurant. It's like, wow, it's like we belong because we see ourselves in a restaurant. This is halal or something, right? But no, this is a document that is so much about revealing the invisibility of the visibility.
Your references here to Al Khamiado, this, interesting dialect of Spanish that's written in Arabic and was the language of the, Muslims of Spain, particularly the Moriscos, reminds me that I think we have in the audience a PhD student who works specifically on Al Hamiado texts. I wonder, Amani, if you would unmute if I could unmute you, if you'd be willing to just engage a little bit here about Al Hamiado and tell us a little bit about that language and what it means to be reading it, to understand
Yeah,
something of the experience.
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you?
Yeah, we can. We can. Great.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, I appreciate the shout out, and I also really was just actually gonna ask, awesome. Of course, El Hamiado, yeah, is a beautiful dialect, and it's very interesting to read. As you mentioned, awesome, it is, of course, in Arabic characters, but then you have the Spanish. You have so many words, of course, coming from Arabic that are in El Hamiado, khalaqa, many different words that actually end up, of course, manifesting in the Spanish language and then endure over time. So it's not even just that the language itself dies with the Moriscos, but it actually endures, of course, in the Romance language as well. But I was just going to say to you that I was just wondering, of course, El Hamiado, yes, of course, is beautiful to read. It's difficult in many ways, and sometimes it's actually very hard to decipher. But I wanted to know, why is it that why is it that we Muslims have kind of failed to uplift these historical languages, and really just kind of revere Arabic as kind of the sacred Quranic text, which is, of course, it is, but at the same time, we neglect to kind of, you know, um, study these other languages. So yes, of course, it's a beautiful language. It's really fun to read, and also because you had so many Muslims at the time, Moriscos especially, who use that language as a means to kind of conceal the religious practice, like you mentioned, Asim and Dr. Hussein, and at the same time, it was um, a way for them to remain connected to what they kind of perceived as one of the last remnants of their Muslim identity, which is that language of Arabic, even if it was actually technically Spanish. So yeah, some really interesting stuff.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Go
Yeah.
ahead, student. Awesome.
Yeah, just to your point here, you know how the Romance languages were developed later on, right? Because well, it was a fusion of Arabic and Latin, and this is an example right here of Mozarabic, right? Um, and how it was like really kind of like a Latin-y kind of language, but it was the Mozarabs would actually use Arabic to write it, and I was actually reading a reference um, for this as well, in that they would even write Arabic better than the Arabs in some cases, and they would know poetry and things like that. So,
Well,
uh,
actually, just to follow up on that, one writer, Paulus Alvarez, actually complained. He was sort of a little bit of a cultural conservative. He was worried that people were losing their Latin and that it also might mean, not only Arabization, but, enculturation in ways that might also undermine their religious identity. However, what's interesting is that, the Mozarabs that you're mentioning, they are Christians who use Arabic script, and they became actually very well versed, as you were suggesting, in Arabic, to the extent that this Paulus Alvarez was complaining that the youth of his day, so these cultural conservatives are always worried about the youth of their day, what they're up to in these kind of culturally diverse environments, that the youth of his day were so aware of like the latest Arabic poetry that they were much more up on, the qasidas and the qasaid and the verses of the Arab poets, and could recite them and had memorized them and could even compose beautiful verse in them, but had lost the ability to read their sacred scriptures in Latin, right? And so this was an example, and I think this gets to the point Carly had asked a really important and interesting question
Mm.
about multiple cultures. Are they just coexisting side by side, but sort of isolated, two solitudes or three solitudes, if we want to use, kind of the example of, how people sometimes talked about Canadian history in Montreal, the Anglophones and the Francophones, they're separate. The language that you've been pointing out with all these interpenetrations of influences and use of script shows that there was some kind of social interaction that changed and altered the language, but also the fact that people like Christian Spaniards became very well versed in Arabic culture shows that in many ways they were actively engaging with one another, not just coexisting as separate kinds of
Right.
communities. So that
And
was a
that
great question, Carly. Thanks for that.
right. And I yeah, it's an excellent question, and I just want to touch on that. The actual the language of science and technology and of innovation was Arabic for during the incline of the Islamic stay in Spain. So that's the reason why, today it's English, and we know English because it's the language of science, the language of innovation, it's the language of technology, it's the language of ideas, you know. But at that time it was Arabic, so you'd see people try to emulate that, and I do have a very special image of that. But I just wanted to answer that question because I think it's a very critical question that Carly asked, and that is that why don't we study Mos-Arabic, or why don't we know about the Moriscos, or why don't we? And I think again the reason is why I wrote the book is because this is really basic. We don't have an awareness. So I think the question is a good one, but it's like an advanced question. It's like more like why don't like how do we get to know about ourselves or our history? We don't even know our histories. We don't even know who we are. It's like that, and it's like you don't even know that we're in a state of emergency here. And so I think like the reason for this project and the reasons for the projects I do, and I was thinking about it tonight, and it's like, well, I guess that's true. Like the work I'm doing is, again, I just do whatever I feel, but I think it's coming from a place to provide some kind of answers, or feel like there's something missing. And again, this has been a really beautiful project because many people felt like they're missing, even from today's times.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's that basic idea. Like, even this, when you present it, people are like, are there that many languages in the world? Are there that many kinds of people in the world? So it's very shocking that what comes out when you have some kind of artwork or some kind of bridge between people and their consciousness, that the conversations come out, because we're very siloed in the way we exist, and we don't know that there's so many worlds out there, and there's so many people out there, and there's so many ideas out there, and there's even Al-Andalus out there. But like, if you've never seen it, you don't even know about it. But then if you see it, and if you see it, you can believe it. And it's like, what is this? And you kind of go, it's that one step of awareness. And I believe that that's really where this conversation is. Before we could even tell our story, I think it's an abstract idea to most people. And so I think that's important to kind of create that awareness, especially for those who know. And again, that's why I'm saying it's a moral crime. If you know something and you don't do anything about it, I feel that that is a crime.
I noticed that that we had a hand up that was raised that
Sure.
is not there anymore, but I want to invite Zuli Himani, if you still have your question. Sorry, we got off on our, digressive riffing there, but I did see your hand, and if you want to ask your question, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. First of all, my compliments for putting this program together. It has been wonderful knowledge. I mean, getting quite an insight of what was happening in those years, and I'm totally ignorant of it. Although I knew about Andalusia and all the and the Spain in which the Muslims were at one point ruling. However, the question that once the Muslims left, the Spanish must have rewritten the history and probably eliminated all the progress that might have been shown during Muslim era. My question comes down to, as being an Ismaili Muslim, I'm also interested in the part the Fatimid Caliphate played in Spain.
Really interesting remarks there. I mean, obviously, the Fatimid Caliphate was based mostly in North Africa, with its capital during the height of its kind of territorial extent and power was in Cairo. In fact, actually, they built Al-Qahira. There was Fustat. There was a earlier city, but they built a new administrative capital called Al-Qahira, or Cairo, next to it or nearby it. And as the cities expanded, they sort of grew together and became known as what we know it as Cairo, Al-Qahira. They'd begun their movement, sort of success in establishing a new state in what is today Tunisia, but they ended up ruling over a pretty vast territory of the southern and eastern Mediterranean, stretching from Tunisia and parts of Algeria all the way to the Levant, and for a period of time the Hejaz, including the Haramain, as well as what is today Jordan, Lebanon, much of Syria, Palestine, and so on. So they were in that corner of the Mediterranean. But I think the important point, and Asim has been showing us all these great images, but also he had shown us some maps, and he even showed us Al-Idrisi's map. That is a map that was developed by a Muslim Arab scholar in Sicily who served the Norman rulers, that is the Catholic Norman, there it is, rulers of Sicily, and created this kind of world map. As you can see from the world map, although you may not recognize it exactly, that one body there is the Mediterranean. Is that the Mediterranean, was a world of connections and interchange. So just because something might be on one side of the Mediterranean taking place there, or there might be a dynasty ruling and governing a state in one part of the Mediterranean, doesn't mean that it's completely isolated from other things that are happening. So one of the things that ended up happening that affected the history of Spain is that in the year, let's see, what is the exact year? I'm a historian, but I'm always bad about dates. 929. Okay, so in the year 929 of the Common Era, the Umayyads, who were, an early, Arab dynasty, they ruled the first Muslim empire, after, with their capital in Damascus. But after the Abbasid revolution that took place in 750, the Umayyads were replaced, and some members of that house and family went to the far Muslim West, as far away as possible, and came to Al-Andalus and ended up being the emirs of Al-Andalus with their capital in Cordoba. In 929, Abdurrahman III ends up declaring himself Khalifa, in some ways in response to the fact that the Fatimids have established a caliphate. They have claimed the Khilafah. And so you have during that period 3 caliphates operating in the broader Muslim world. There are the Abbasids with their capital in Baghdad. There are the Fatimids ruling in Cairo, and the Umayyads claiming to still be the legitimate Muslim monarchs for all Muslims in Cordoba. And why that's important is just that whenever you make these kind of grand claims about your status as the head of a global empire, is you try and reflect that in dramatic kind of visual evidence of your power and the greatness of your court, and so you build great mosques and monumental architecture, and you patronize a lot of poets to write great poetry, and you patronize and support scholars to do new scientific experiments and to develop new forms of knowledge and inquiry. And so you have a kind of cultural and intellectual efflorescence that accompanied this kind of status, the claim that we are this great kind of empire and that the capital is Cordoba. So Cordoba had to become worthy as the great capital. And the way you do that is by investing in these great monuments and supporting all kinds of cultural activity. So we've seen a couple of images of the Cordoba mosque that was the Grand Mosque of Cordoba, that was built by the Umayyad dynasts to reflect, the status of Cordoba as an imperial capital. Do you want to take us through a little bit of this experience that you had of visiting the Cordoba Cathedral?
Absolutely. I went, honest to God, when I arrived here, I really felt like Allah was here. Like you just feel the amazing level of faith. You cannot, create this kind of innovation as a normal person. It's impossible. And like when I was here, I just immediately felt that all this kind of architecture and innovation and foresight, really, and something beyond your time. This is really something beyond your time, and really an example of forward thinking people. And I'm not trying to be biased, honestly. You have non-Muslims coming here, right? It's like not me. It's just it's everyone comes over here. In fact, it's still called the Mezquita of Cordoba, incidentally.
Right.
Even though there's a cathedral they built a cathedral in the mosque. And so to be honest with you, I'm going to share my feelings. I was extremely angry because it's like, like why would they do that, right? Because it's really, I didn't feel it was right. And on top of it, they don't let you pray in the mosque. You're not allowed to pray here.
Yeah.
You're stopped if you pray.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So for me, that was my feeling in it. And again, it gives you more. It's all the more reasons why you have to share perspectives in formal ways to reach audiences. I think it's important to do that and to share that, to balance ideas and to be able to dismantle this idea of, see, there's your story and there's the story, right? Your story and then the story. So if your story is not the story, then how does your story become part of the story? And I think that's the challenge, is that there's a gray zone in there and no one tells you how to get to the story.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wonder, people have different ideas of what's important in these stories. The fact that Spanish authorities and the Catholic authorities that currently manage the Cordoba Cathedral, even though, as you point out, its history begins, it's believed by scholars, there's some thoughts that there was a kind of pre-existing shrine of some kinds, but that's really very much disputed. But the main point is that the building as it was created really was an expression of, having a Friday prayer mosque, right, in this kind of imperial capital built by the Umayyads. Its history was mainly, until the 13th century, was as a mosque until I think 1239. When it was then taken over, it was kept architecturally the way it looked, with the colonnades and that distinctive different pattern of stones in the arches, different colors. for a few hundred years, but at a certain point in the early modern period, in like the 16th or 17th century, they put that chapel. That was an amazing photo you had there of the church and the mosque. Essentially, is that basically in the prayer hall, what they imposed and built was a typical kind of inside of the chapel within the Muslim prayer hall. So you can see the altar, and there with the candles and the light, and then it's been kind of imposed into the center of what was the prayer hall, right? And now, so this history, on the one hand, they can't ignore the previous history of it having been a mosque. So the question is what is being celebrated and remembered, when they prevent Muslims from using it as a place of prayer in the mosque, even though it is a continuing, Catholic cathedral that holds services, is that they're saying in some ways your history doesn't belong here. It's this, exclusion. We have, taken back this this sacred site, and it's unfortunate because there could be a lot of creative ways to think of this as a multi-faith site and have it be open and celebrate all, aspects and periods of its history and its use as an emblem of a multi-religious society. But clearly, that's not, that's not the approach that they're taking.
Right.
But I wanted to mention also that Amani put in a really excellent question here. And I was wondering your thoughts, and also maybe we could open this up. Other people might have interesting, positions on this, or might have some interesting discussion here. She said, many Muslims view Al-Andalus with nostalgia and sadness. This glorious reign of Islamic rule, which was compelled to come to an end, and a blow to our collective historical identity and image. How can contemporary Muslims move from static nostalgia to actually viewing it through a lens of opportunity, empowerment, education, etc.? So I think that's a great question that gets to the heart of what are the legacies of Muslim Spain for us now? Why does it matter? Is it just a kind of, we were great once and isn't this wonderful? And now it's just sort of sad that it's been kind of dispossessed. There's been a dispossession of it. Even when it is visible, is it really visible if it's only through the lens of nostalgia? This is a great kind of question or problem. How should we view it, and how should we think about it? And I think if people want to raise their hand and contribute, that would be great. But Asim, I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I think that for me, I think it is really about, for me, it's basic. I think to get to the point where we can, see like the Moses kind of film. It's like seeing it is believing it. But the difference is that even though Moses is a Semitic figure, and really for the Jewish people and the Islamic people, I don't know if everyone knows that or not, but I mean, he's a revered prophet in the Islamic faith. But at the same time, Moses was able to cross the line, right? Whereas traditionally Jewish people lived in Islamic lands and in Spain with the Muslims and were typically persecuted by the Christians. Here we have an opposite effect where a Jewish story is now a mainstream story in a widely Christian kind of cultural country, right? In the West, so it's like, I think until and unless, so this is all connected. It's just not about Al-Andalus. It's about today, and it's about the future. I think when things start to cross the line, as I say, between various communities, you need to cross the line. I think if you just stay in the Muslim community, you could talk about this till the doomsday, but it's not going to change anything. It has to somehow come into the public discourse or into some kind of public sphere. And so I think art is a very good way to do that. It's excellent. It's an excellent bridge between people. But I think it's very basic. I think it's the awareness needs to be created to begin with, to then have those conversations, I think, of how to, and I think it's I believe it's art. I think that's my thing, but it's also personalities. If you remember Nazem Kadri, when he joined the Toronto Maple Leafs, he is a Lebanese Canadian Muslim hockey player, but why did the CBC do a special on him for Ramadan? They don't do a special on Connor McDavid for Christmas. Why did they do a special on Nazem Kadri? Well, because he may be a bit different, but the story is powerful. So that personality does cross the line, and you do have that story. But I think every one of us is a change maker. We don't have to be celebrities. I think that once we inculcate this nucleus of what is going on, and this is very dangerous. And how when you Wikipedia something or Google something, and the first thing you see is again the readiness to invade. That's the narrative we all live with. We need to break that somehow. But I don't want to just say it and make it sound good that we need to break it. I think you are the change, and I think that's where it starts. I mean, I tried to do this project and a few other projects that I worked on. I mean, so, and I'm here sharing the experiences, and I think, yeah, I don't know if that's making any sense, but
Oh, no, no. I think, in fact, actually, that sort of gets at a question that Nick had raised in the chat about, non-academic works and how they can change some of these narratives and perceptions and bring a different kind of mainstream an understanding into mainstream culture.
right.
But there's a bunch of people with questions or hands up, and so I want to first get to Ghulam, who's had his hand up for a while and been patient, and after that, Carly, and then a different question by Nick. So, Ghulam, let's unmute Ghulam Rabbani, which everyone, look for an episode of the Majlis coming out very soon about Ghulam's exciting and amazing research on music and religion, the particular tradition of spiritual music in Bangladesh. You're going to love it. So, but at any rate, Ghulam, what's your question or comment on this?
Thank you so much for that, Professor. My question is actually more an aesthetic one. As I remember, you were, Asim Hussain was talking about the dream with the title page of the book, and it's a bridge. So, and then at certain point, I saw the bridge in breaking itself up in another image. So I was thinking that I find a bit of, obviously you're referring to dreams, so it's a bit of surreal symbolism happening there, and a bit of cubism as well in the breaking part. I was wondering what are the symbolic values, if you have your personal symbolic values of this bridge. And just an added to that, another book of yours, My Skin Brown, the title page, the artwork of the title page. Could you please also elaborate on the symbolic value of that as well? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that question, because I forgot to tell the rest of the story. And that, yeah, so essentially these flying pieces came down, and it formed this strong bridge. And the thing was, when I went to Cordoba, when we went on the tour, I just asked the tour guide, are we going to see any bridges on the tour? And that was a very strange question, because no one asks these kinds of questions. They say, if we how much money should we bring? What kind of clothes should we wear? And what are we going to see? But he's kind of looked at me and was thinking like, what? And then that was it. I did not do any research. I promise. I did not do anything at all on Spain at all. As I said, I was not interested in going to Europe. But the day I arrived in Cordoba, I saw this bridge, and I didn't believe it at first. I was like, no, I'm going to wait to see more of the trip, because there could be more that we see. And in fact, I did see another bridge towards the end of my trip that I quickly want to show you. It's just fascinating. This is when the Muslims were expelled from the Al-Bukhara mountains, from Granada. This is what you call the old Muslim bridge. It's a huge valley underneath here, and they built this at that time. It's just absolutely incredible. This is how the bridge looks like. And I thought to myself, like, this is from the main road, but I thought to myself, I can now compare the bridges that I've seen. This is the bridge. I can compare the bridges, and to be honest with you, when I reviewed what I saw, it was the bridge from Cordoba that I saw in my dream. And the way the story goes is that I think there's a reason why this came together. And I think the reason is that everything that we do is based on everything else that we do. When we take a step, that step needs to be fortified. It needs to be the right step. And I think when you take the right steps, you become very strong. And I think you can then be in Urdu they say Sahara, but what's the word? You become useful for others because people can rely on you. And when you're strong, people people can rely on you, and you can make change. And I believe that the way I designed the bridge was the title was that on the title page here, the bridge is forever, because I believe that just like Al-Andalus is forever, when you this is emotional, oh my God, when you see the Alhambra Palace, and you see the mosques and stuff, and you see the what people have done, it's forever. And that's like me and you. We can be forever as well. It's not a physical thing. Giving is forever. And I think this is about giving. And I think when you do the right things, you will give forever. So.
Well, I think we do have a lot of other questions as well. I think Carly had a question again.
Yeah, I did. I first had a comment.
Go for
Amani,
it.
I really liked your question about how can we take kind of nostalgia and look kind of through a more positive lens. But I feel like in order to get to a more positive lens, such as opportunity, education, empowerment, you need the nostalgia because it means that there's something that you want to go forward with. And if you're looking through a place of sadness, that means that there's hope for a future, or there's hope to get out of that sadness, and that there's emotion at all, like in general. And I think nostalgia is really special in that way, that you can look back at something and then hope to either use that as an educational tool, whether it's to educate others, like we're doing right now. I knew about none of this, or to use that as inspiration. I think nostalgia isn't necessarily something holding you back. Rather, it is the tool in which you can use for opportunity, empowerment, and education. So I just really like that comment.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, I just had a quick question about the mosque with the cathedral in it. Again, this is all firsthand knowledge to me, so I've never learned about any of this before, and it's really like frustrating that the cathedral is still operating, yet the mosque space isn't, like you can't pray there. And I was wondering if that was a strategic decision in terms of having Muslim and non-Muslim visitors, or whether that was a decision in which to erase a part of Muslim history. I've never been to a mosque. I've only been to like a church once, but I know at least with like churches and synagogues, like you can go in them while people are praying, and you can view architecture and observe while people are praying. And I'm not sure if while a mosque is in prayer session, if that is something you can do, if it would still be kind of a historical tool. Like, could you still be able to go and visit the mosque if it was in a service? Sorry, that was a lot. If I need to clarify something, let me know.
That's firstly, just on your first remark, though, Carly, that was a really interesting observation. I mean, I think thinking about the emotional elements, and this is one reason why I was so excited to have Asim sharing his art and talking about this kind of journey and context in this sort of dialogue, because in addition to the academic understanding and realization that we might have about these narratives and about how they need to be revised to be more accurate and they're also more inclusive, and what that might mean for people's sense of identity, the contemporary politics around understanding Islam and Muslims, and challenging some of these stereotypes and so on. That in addition to that, we're human beings, and these are important at an emotional level, and so there might be some way in which that encounter that Asim had artistically has an emotional content that gives further insight. So your comments on that really interesting in response to Amani's points. As far as just the informational thing, different communities will handle things in slightly different ways. In some parts of North Africa, the actual prayer space, the courtyard may be open, but sometimes the actual prayer space is not, open to visitors. But in other contexts, and if you go to Istanbul, for example, some of the Ottoman mosques from the 16th, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, are open, throughout the day. People might be, asked to be quiet or not be walking and meandering around in the prayer hall during the actual prayer, but it's much more kind of accessible to visitors and so on. So I think there's a range, and it's also a little bit like what I have encountered also, doing research in Europe and visiting, various churches. When the real service is beginning, you might stand just at the back, and look into the church, but not, circulate among the pews, during the service and so on. So being mindful, I think that's just a sense of respect, and there isn't any kind of strict prevention of people having access typically to these great monuments of architecture and of beautiful decoration.
Yeah, and
So
sorry.
sorry, I was just going to add. So in the case then of the mosque cathedral, would you then argue that it was somewhat malicious that the cathedral could operate but the mosque couldn't, and they didn't ask for any outside perspective?
Well, I think what it is an expression of a sense of sovereign predominance. I mean, they believe that this is, a site that now belongs to the Catholic Church, and it's an emblem of Christianity's kind of supremacy, really, in this context. And I was just trying to argue that there's a way in which that approach or attitude to it mirrors some of the more conservative ideas about how Muslims don't belong or should be excluded from Spain, and the way in which this history of 900 years is kind of quarantined, or it's like, I mean, Asim is showing some of these images of all these sites he visited, and of course that Cordoba, the Alhambra Palace in Granada is one of the most visited tourist sites in Europe and certainly in Spain. And so they're willing to kind of cash in on the tourist sort of trade and the fact that these amazing monuments were produced by people in an earlier era of history. They can be exotic, oriental, kind of curiosities that are also part of a consumer tourist culture. But they don't necessarily want to say that they have a legitimate place in, Spain's contemporary, society, right? So there's that kind of sense of exclusion. Muslims don't really belong here in this society and don't have any claim, to belonging. And that's kind of on a microcosmic level what that exclusion in the Cordoba Cathedral, that policy of excluding Muslim prayer, is meant is meant to indicate, and that it has its analogy also in a politics around larger integration and belonging in the society of Spain.
But
And that's why this history matters, right? That's why we should be talking about this history, is because to say how crazy is it to exclude Muslims when, for from the 9th century to the 13th, this was a mosque, and it's gorgeous and it's beautiful and it could be shared and part of, the rich, multi-layered, multi-religious tapestry of Spain's history.
One thing is that you see Muslims everywhere in Spain. Like these are, every city had a central mosque, and this is like an example of it. But you can see that this was the minaret of the mosque, but they put a cathedral type thing on top. So again, for me to see this kind of stuff throughout Spain, I started to become agitated and angry, to be honest, because it's like it's everywhere. You see the Muslims everywhere. It looks like a church, but it's not. It's a mosque. This was a mosque. It got converted to a church, right? And so you see it in the language. You see, I mean, Spain could not be what it is. You have like olive oil from Spain. You have the Renaissance. I mean, it couldn't have happened without the Muslims. It couldn't have happened because the Muslims expounded on Greek works. And when Toledo was burned down, during the Reconquista, which you see over here, you see where the Muslims are surrendering. You had people, you had the Christians convert Arabic works into Latin and siphon out all that knowledge. So they didn't burn all the books. They used them as well for themselves. So it's a massive contribution that's academic at best, and maybe a few footnotes, because it feels like that. It really does. Here, but I want to give you another. So I don't want to gloss over it. That in itself can be the end of the beginning and end of this conversation. It's right here. It's like, like so much. Like it's not just occupying an area. It's the contribution of this area of these people. It's fascinating. Here's an example of a Christian king that employed Muslim architects to build a castle that looked like the Islamic castles, but this is a Christian castle. And this right here says Allah, but they put a cross there as well. If you know how the Arabic goes, this says Allah, but they put a cross here. So, it's I mean, there's alliances like Dr. Adnan said in this time, and this is a clear example of that, right? So yeah, it was just it's a very beautiful castle, but everything inside here is Islamic. Like there's even like Islamic calligraphy here, right? I'm sure the king knew that there would be Islamic calligraphy inside the castle. I mean, it's just fascinating, beautiful, and the intricacy is breathtaking. So this was a highly emotional trip for me, and the reason why I went there was to really take in the architecture, to see what it was really like for myself. But I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't realize I would be very emotional. I didn't realize like I would see Islam all over Spain. I didn't realize that 30% or more of the Spanish language is from Arabic. I didn't know all these things. I was just, and so really my attempt is to create dialogue through this work for other people to ask their own questions and to begin that journey of crossing the line and telling our stories, and to balance the narratives, and to stop this kind of idea of like, just that single, and you know what? I respect this, because that could be someone else's opinion in the sense that, but is that the only thing? apparently it is. I mean, I remember Britannica back in the day, it would be a prestigious thing to buy the whole set. It's like, I have the Encyclopedia Britannica, you know. But so this is the kind of stuff that exists. Even in the BBC, I was reading that they start off by saying, in 711, Muslim forces invaded Spain, and in 7 years conquered the Iberian Peninsula. Where do they mention that the Visigothic people like invited them for help? You have respectable news outlets like this, skewing the story. So why would someone challenge the BBC? You would just take it for what it is. So I think it's critical to not leave this as an academic conversation, because that's what academics do all day long, but they're not crossing the line either. Academics talk to other academics, but how do you cross the line and make it social? That's the question. So that's what I'm trying to do a bit, I guess, with my work. There's a huge amount of work to still do and learn and so on. But this is the kind of idea that perhaps that just by looking at something like this, or by looking at something like this, or by looking at something like this, you would see. And in fact, in this project, I did try to capture all the major historical points of throughout time, including the souks. So this is the mosque that you saw, and so I had to do the research and just to see how the society would look at that time, and so this gives you an idea of what it was, and this is like a kind of like a typical market, and of course this is the Mesquita of Cordoba, and then of course the bridge. This is the Al-Bukhara Mountains. This is where the Muslims were expelled to, or when they were pushed out of, when they were expelled from Granada. So they lived in the Al-Bukhara Mountains. And as Dr. Adnan said, there are some amazing technologies that they made where they channeled water through the mountains into their villages. There's 3 distinct villages that they had built, and they had channeled water into that. And it was just fascinating. It was just really fascinating to see that and to learn about that. Again, there's cities that come straight up from Arabic, that have Arabic names. Even like I was reading up how there's in grammar as well, and the names of rivers as well, is you have Arabic words. Here's another one that I just discovered, the Spanish word for ojalá. This is actually from inshallah, which means God willing. So this is actually in the Spanish language.
Yeah, you pronounce it ojalá.
Ojalá. Okay. Okay.
Excellent.
Good. Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to time, so I just want to move to another great comment and question from Sanober, who mentioned that the term Morisco, was actually used derogatorily towards Muslim converts to Christianity in Spain, and later towards mixed race populations in Latin America. And after that observation, how do such histories provide a node of interconnected histories of race and racialization and solidarity through shared and different historical experiences across time and space? And I am so glad you asked this question, because that kind of gets us back to my land acknowledgement, because I really think when we talk about the ending of Muslim Spain and its subsequent erasure, it really has a lot to do with exactly this point. I mean, the term Morisco was indeed derogatory. It was basically saying that even though they have converted to Christianity, they still are Moorish in some ways, and it was a way of marking them out and maintaining some sense of their difference, and a status difference between old Christians and new Christians emerges, that also takes the form of new statutes that are developed after this massive forced conversion of the Muslim population in order to preserve their social distinction that they had originally as, the dominant community of Christians over Jews and Muslims. But now what do you do when everybody has now technically become Christian? Well, is that you then turn towards making these distinctions of cultural practices and what were called the statutes around limpieza de sangre, purity of blood. Who could trace their blood to old Christian families without having intermixed with these moriscos, right? So you end up having a blood lineage way of defining social hierarchies in Spain, and also marking out the moriscos for their practices. So what you end up having is this idea that the moriscos, even though they are now Christians, are not actually good Christians because they're hanging on to some of their practices from before, whether they're Muslim religious practices because they're covertly continuing to practice Islam, or because there are aspects of their culture like wearing henna on your hands, right? Or going to the hammam or the bathhouse regularly. These things were actually legislated out and forbidden in the mid 16th century. There were statutes that actually suppressed wearing henna on the hands, the use of Arabic as a language, going to the hammam or the bathhouse, and certain forms even of traditional music that came from North Africa, like the zarfa. And so what we have is the move away from just defining difference in religious terms, right? Christian versus Muslim or Jew, to culturalizing these differences and ultimately racializing these differences. And so some of the modes of exclusion, and we would have to say settler colonialism, that are developed by the old Christian elites after the conquest of Granada and through the conquest of other places that had been Muslim lands and that were majority Muslim even until the 16th century. Until the 16th century, places like Valencia, until they were forcibly converted, were majority Muslim. So what ends up happening is that by 1609, they decide that the Morisco, the former Muslim population, are not assimilable. They cannot be assimilated. They may have been converted, but they have not been assimilated. And that's why they had the Inquisition investigate people for not being good Christians. And so they decide that we have to expel this population. We cannot integrate them into Spanish society. And so they expel them, and they tried many things to crush the culture, outlaw Arabic. They also developed schools, special schools run by the religious establishment that separated Muslim or Morisco children from their families in order to educate them and form them to be good Christians. Maybe that sounds familiar to institutions that we're familiar with here, even in Canada. So my point here is that this approach of settler colonialism in Spain is not something that just stayed in Spain, but obviously the Spaniards exported many of these ideas into the Atlantic world, and also these have an enduring and continuing relevance for how settler colonial societies treated the indigenous people and those that were racialized as other outside of what their how they define their community. And so, Ahmed had asked, what is the kind of legacy of this kind of reconquista in the contemporary Europe, and I would say also in North America? What it is these kind of right-wing fascistic ideas of white supremacy that perdure. They continue in Europe and inform their politics, and also likewise in North America. And that's why it's very important that we have this kind of a program and theme to recognize that we are in a settler colonial environment, and with whom must we have solidarity? If we remember our own history, the history of Muslims in Spain, who is it that we should be having solidarity with? What should we be working towards? That is the indigenous people, and not to reproduce and try and integrate ourselves into the settler colonial project of the Canadian state, just as it wouldn't have been appropriate for people to support the oppression of the forcibly converted Muslims and Jews of Iberia. So great questions, that people put in there. Sorry, that was trying to deal with 3 questions at once. Gabriella had a question as well, but in the meantime, as Gabriella's getting ready to ask hers, Asima, it looked like maybe you had something you wanted to add in there in my harangue. So, please go ahead, make it more of a dialogue. Apologies for going off on a riff there.
Right. I have something very special that I want to share with the audience. It's another project I just released, and I don't know if it's Al-Andalus, that famous image of it sleeping and it wants to get up. But I have I can share that surprise with you guys. It's a story that's from Al-Andalus. It is a story from Al-Andalus today that goes back 17 generations. And I just received it and I want to share it with you. But if you want to take some questions first, we can definitely do that. But I think Al-Andalus might want to come back.
I think you should go for it. Let's tell people about the story and the other project.
Okay, awesome. Here, if you maybe we can share it in the chat as well, so that people can follow along. If you go to islamophobia.io, this is a project that crosses the line, and it's a project for Muslims and allies to do something about it. And it's based on storytelling. So I just recently released it, and the whole idea is that when people come to know, it's that basic idea of like creating awareness. And so there's fascinating stories already on here on different kinds of topics. And the whole idea is you can talk directly about Islamophobia, or you could talk about yourself and what overlap you have with the community in your own way. But the point is that this is now an opportunity for the public to learn about, in the words of Muslims and allies, of how the community actually is. We are the storytellers. We're not a footnote. We are not some soundbite. This is real stuff. I mean, there's some really powerful stories. This is a story about foster care, for example, or the power of wallahi on the basketball court. I have a non-Muslim guy here from Montreal talking about how, when you say wallahi on the basketball court, you can't argue with it. It's silent. So it's powerful stuff. I mean, here's a story of a Jewish rabbi. Here, by the way, sister, we have some familiar people from here as well who have shared stories. But here, this is a story of a rabbi from that dates back 40 years in Detroit. Beautiful, emotional story. But I wanted to share this one story, and it's the latest story. It was meant for us. This is a story, and it's entitled, everything was perfect. This is a story about a Jewish family, and this is a Jewish individual from a Jewish background who talks about how his father's family that had been in Morocco for the past 17 generations were expelled from Spain in 1492. It's a really beautiful story, and it's incredible how he talks about some of the Islamic dynasties here. But then he goes on to say that how he was fascinated by the motifs and the designs, and he says how the Jewish people made beautiful, magnificent Torahs, much in the style of the beautiful Qurans. So this is that influence and that coexistence here that And I'm not trying to like romanticize it in any way. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that this is a story straight from Al-Andalus today. And so this is extremely relevant. And this is that whole idea of crossing the line, but talking about the past, talking about the future, and talking about right now. And I believe people will take something away from this, and that's what it is. You don't know what your art can do. You don't know what kind of change you can make. You just got to do it. And I've seen it in my life. I've talked to 1,000 people and no one's done nothing. I've talked to one person and they changed my life. So you know, you don't know what who you're going to meet and what will happen. But if you got some ideas and you try to put it together, forget about the sky. There's no limit. There is no limit. It's incredible. And I couldn't have done this project. I just want to mention one last thing without this gentleman here, Professor David Booth, who unfortunately, he was a great friend of mine and who believed in what I was trying to do. And he worked on every single project I worked on, including My Skin Brown, which was mentioned, and Khadija Goes to School, which was my first project 10 years ago. Unfortunately, he passed away during the project. And you know, for him, I had to do it. I had to, like, it was just, you know, it just stopped me in my tracks. And in fact, I dedicated the book to Professor David Booth, because, you know, to make change, you need people to believe in you. Actually, you know, you actually need people to believe in you as well. You can't do it by yourself. So, yeah.
Awesome. I really want to thank you. This has been such a special treat, I think, to really engage with this history in a lively, meaningful way for, as you were saying, the present and the future. It's so vital that we engage with this past in the right way so that we can find inspiration, find these connections, and get busy working on a better future together. This project that you just introduced with this story, an Andalus-related story, is a really important project about telling stories, confronting Islamophobia through narratives, through experiences. And we are asking everybody to submit their stories. And we would like, you know, people to submit a story, if you can, maybe on the theme. We thought maybe it would be good to have a particular theme to stimulate a kind of coherent discussion that we might have on kindness. Okay, so stories of kindness by, you know, Muslims, to Muslims, by allies, to allies, etc., to reflect on that theme. And on October 26th at 7:30, that's a Tuesday, later in this month, we want to collect those stories and have another session with student Asim on this project and talk about this project as a whole, but also share your stories, talk and reflect about those stories. So do visit this website. Do think about what you might want to share. We'll be promoting this in all of our upcoming events and reminding you, but this is our first event. Start thinking about stories that you could submit to this site, and so that we can have a discussion about them in a kind of workshop experience about telling stories, generating our stories, and dealing with the realities of Muslim lived experience here in Canada. That would be great. So that's another event that we're going to be having with student Asim. So again, thank you so much for coming, all of you, to this. We do need to wrap things up, but we have upcoming events. You can find out about them at, you know, these sort of spots up above, and on Twitter, Instagram, our Facebook page, or website. There'll be posters. You can join our email list. Next week, on Thursday, October 14th, we're going to be talking about Muslims in Kingston and stories of Muslims in Kingston with author Murray Hogben, who's a local Kingstonian. Actually, maybe he's a Gananoquian rather than a Kingstonian, but he's in the area, and he's written an important book, Minarets on the Horizon, Muslim Pioneers in Canada, and he'll be joining us. He'll be joining me and Dr. Shobana Xavier from the School of Religion to talk a little bit about Muslims in Kingston, and we invite you to come to that, and we want to hear your stories about Muslim experience in Kingston. And we will also be having talk about Sufism coming up after that, and then, as I said, the week following that, we want to collect these stories and talk with Asim again and do a workshop. So look for these events. There's a whole bunch of them. I couldn't tell you all about them now. Go find out about them. But do prepare yourself, to participate on the 26th by producing your own story. And I just want you to encourage everyone to go check out Student Asim's work. You can see here how to stay in touch with him and to find out about some of his other works. And he's shown us a little bit of this Champion for Life mural, but also especially this last part here, the Islamophobia Storytelling Project. We'll be coming back to that. So check out his work. And again, Asim, thank you so much for joining us. This was a thrill to discuss with you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much it's really been special. And I actually forgot to mention that it is like coming home because my father went to Queen's University. So this is how our story started in this country many, many years ago. So it was really, truly an honor to be here and to even try to contribute to this discussion. And I really appreciate your time and the prep that we did. And again, to Sister Mona Rahman for being such an amazing person. And I hope it's been good.
It's been great. We've really enjoyed it. People are thanking you in the chat for sharing all of this. And, I've been trying to get you to make sure your father joins us on the 14th because we'd love to hear his story too. So let's gather everybody, hopefully the elders of this community and around, all of Canada, North America, even around the world. We were talking about Muslims in Kingston, but it's about a universal experience, both the particular and the general, and we're here to share. And check out the Islamophobia.io website and tell your story. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. We're looking forward to seeing you again soon. Assalamu alaikum.